The wind came low and dry through the cottonwoods, tugging at the hem of her skirt like a child who had forgotten how to speak. Mary stood with her back to the road, shoulders drawn tight beneath the brown wool shawl that had once belonged to her mother. The dirt was pale and cracked, lifting in faint, ghost-like whirls that licked at her boots. Behind her, the wagon creaked under its load a few trunks, a tin pail, and 7 children to quiet for their number. They had buried John in the spring when the river still roared and the earth gave up its cold grudgingly. The cough took him fast, the way it sometimes did with strong men one day working the field. The next laid low, his skin drawn tight over bone. By summer, the land they dreaded was gone, the landlord quick to reclaim what was never truly theirs. Mary had written to a cousin she barely remembered, a man she knew only by the rumors of cattle and wide land in Wyoming territory. She hadn't expected an answer, but one came, in pencil and misspelled, promising workspace and a roof. No offer of kindness, just function. That suited her. The sun dropped low over the dry hills. Red minus orange light stained the sky like spilled juice from a blood orange. One of the boys, Thomas, maybe coughed from the wagon bed. No one spoke. She glanced down the long road again. The dust of their arrival had already settled. No one had met them. The ranch house, if it existed, was out of sight beyond a gate that sagged on one hinge and a rutted trail that bent like a tired spine into the hills. Mary adjusted the baby on her hip. Nora slept, mouth open, cheek pressed to her collarbone. Her little legs were dirty, knees scraped from a fall 2 towns back. Mary touched the girl's heel gently. It was warm. She was breathing. She took a step forward, then another. The wagon creaked behind her, pulled by a single mule with a limp. The land said nothing. The sky was too wide to care. She hadn't been inside a house since May. The ranch house rose out of the land like it had grown there, weathered gray wood, a rusted stovepipe, no front steps, just a flat stone sunk into hard dirt. She knocked once before pushing the door open. The man who stood inside looked like the land he lived on, tall, wind-bitten, brown as bark. He had a scar down the left side of his jaw and eyes that didn't blink fast. "You Mary?" he asked. His voice sounded like gravel being shoveled. She nodded. He looked past her to the wagon, to the children sitting upright as soldiers. "You got more than I figured." Her lips cracked as she spoke. "They don't eat much." He grunted. "They will." The silence after that stretched long and uncomfortable, broken only when a fly buzzed past her ear and landed on the baby's hair. She swatted it away with her sleeve. He stepped aside. "There's space." "Not much, but it's dry. It'll make room in the barn for the wagon. Water pumps out back." She walked past him without thanking him. Her legs shook slightly beneath her skirts, though she didn't let it show. The children followed. Inside, the house smelled of smoke and soaked pork. There were no curtains, just 4 walls, a table, 2 chairs, and a cot pushed against the far side. The floor creaked under their feet. The man stood by the doorway watching. She could feel it. "Name's Eli," he said finally. She didn't turn. "We won't stay longer than we're useful." Eli didn't answer. She heard him shift, then the screamed or groan behind him as he stepped back out. Mary lowered the baby onto a folded quilt, brushing curls from her forehead. Her hands trembled. She folded them in her lap and made herself sit still. The children stood uncertain, looking to her. All of them, everyone had his eyes. "We're here," she said, her voice rough but steady. "That's enough for now." The sun was gone. The wind kept coming. The first night passed with no fire and barely a word. Mary sat upright against the wall, knees drawn close, a child curled on each side. They had no beds, no linens beyond what they brought, just the wood floor and the brittle quiet of a strange place. The baby stirred once and whimpered, then settled again. Mary kept her hand on the girl's back, feeling the small rise and fall. The moon cast thin silver bars through the bare window. Somewhere outside, a coyote called once sharp, lonely. No answer came. Mary closed her eyes, but sleep was far off. Morning came with frost on the water pump and the sour stench of animals nearby. Eli was already outside, slamming a gate shut, a pitchfork in hand. His boots scraped the ground with a steady rhythm. Mary watched him through the window as she braided her oldest daughter's hair, fingers stiff from the cold. He did not look up. By the third day, they'd fallen into a rhythm of silence and movement. Mary rose early, started the fire, boiled the beans if there were any, cornbread if there was flour. She kept the children busy gathering wood, hauling water, sweeping dirt from the floor. Eli didn't speak unless he had to, but he didn't stop them either. On the fifth morning, she found a sack of potatoes left by the door. No, just the sack. She looked at it, then at the man in the yard, working a lamed horse's leg with rough care. She said nothing, but that night she sliced them thin and fried them in the skillet H.E.D. left behind without a word. It was Thomas who wandered close to the fence line first. He was the second oldest, lean and quiet, eyes always watching. H.E.D. wandered past the chicken coop toward the eastern fence while Mary tended to Nora's fever. She saw him from the window just as he stumbled and cried out. A rusty barb had cut deep into his thigh. She ran. When she reached him, Eli was already there, crouched low, his big hand on the boy's small shoulder. "Hold still," he said, soft enough that it didn't sound like him. Thomas gritted his teeth, tears streaking dirt on his face. Mary knelt beside him and tore a strip from her hem without thinking. Eli handed her a canteen. The water was warm. She wrapped the boy's leg, then looked up. "He'll need rest." Eli nodded. "He can rest." They carried him together, Eli taking most of the weight, Mary guiding his head. Afterward, when the boy was laid on the pallet and sleeping, Eli stood by the door silent. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "There's a better way around the fence. You'll show the others." She didn't thank him, but she looked at him a moment longer than before. One morning Mary rose to find a hammer and a box of nails by the door. A stack of unused boards leaned against the side of the house. No one said it, but the meaning was clear. They built the bunk shelves together, her measuring and sawing, Eli steadying each plank. The children watched from the doorway, wide-minded eyed. He worked slowly, hands sure. He never looked at her directly, but once as she passed him a nail, their fingers brushed. She pulled away fast, but he did not. Eli never asked about John, and she never offered. But some evenings after the children were asleep, they sat across from each other by the stove, nursing tin cups of weak coffee. Words came in bits: weather, harvest, wolves spotted near the ridge. She learned that H.E.D. been alone for winters, that his brother had died in a river accident, and the land passed to him by loss, not choice. He asked about her only once, eyes fixed on the fire. "You come from Kansas?" She nodded. "Near Ellis. Hard land." She looked down. "They're all hard." He didn't argue. She started to notice small things. A second cup already poured when she came in from feeding the goats. A stack of kindlings split and left neatly near the door. The way he watched the children from the corner of his eye, especially the littlest ones, as if unsure whether he was allowed to care. And she, Mary, who had not let herself soften since the spring, found her eyes drifting to him when his back was turned, not out of need, out of something harder to name. She still slept with her boots on, still kept a knife near the door, but her hands no longer shook when she washed them in the morning. And once, as she passed the barn, she heard him humming low and tuneless, but unmistakably human. She did not stop walking, but she smiled. Ride through the quiet, subscribe and stay. The cold deepened as October settled its weight on the hills. Frost came each morning now, pale and quiet, creeping up the windows like veins. The children's breath fogged in the air as they dressed, huddling close to the stove for warmth. Mary mended what coats she could from old quilts, stitching by lantern light long into the evenings. Eli had offered them the barn for sleeping, said it would be warmer with the horses' breath and hay. She declined, without giving a reason. The house was cramped, yes, but it felt more real, more rooted. The barn still felt like borrowed time. He didn't press. They rarely spoke of anything personal. But there were days now when they worked side by side, mending fence posts, hauling grain, moving livestock before the first snow. It was during these hours that something quiet unfolded between them. Not words, but a rhythm, a shared tempo, a silence that didn't feel cold. One afternoon, As they worked to fix a broken hinge on the south gate, she saw it. A bundle of letters in a tin box, wedged between two planks of the barn wall, old and faded, bound with twine. She didn't ask, but Eli noticed her glance. "They're from my mother," he said, still hammering. "Wrote to me every week when I first came out here. Is she gone?" He nodded once. "Long time now." Mary lowered her eyes, the air between them thick with what they didn't say. Her mother had died before her second child. She hadn't spoken her name in years. There was a morning nearly mid-November when the frost turned to snow. Just a dusting at first, barely more than powdered sugar on the hard earth, but enough to change the sound of everything. The sky hung heavy, flat and colorless, the kind of gray that pressed on the bones. Mary stepped outside to feed the chickens and stopped still. There, across the field, Eli knelt beside the oldest boy, James, showing him how to mend a bridle. The boy's face was lit with something rare interest, focus, maybe even pride. She stood there longer than she meant to. Later that day, when she was sorting beans at the table, James came to her and asked if he could help Eli again the next morning. Her heart snagged in her chest before she gave a nod. Trouble came in the form of a letter. It arrived by rider, handed off without fanfare, a square envelope with her name written in the stiff hand of her late husband's cousin, Owen. She hadn't heard from him in months, had thought perhaps she never would again. She opened it alone in the barn, hands stiff, throat dry. He wrote with the assumption of authority, a reminder that her children were kin to him by blood, that a woman alone in the territory could not offer the life they needed. He had found work near Denver, could take the boys in, maybe the girls later. Said she could join them if she wanted, if she gave up the stubbornness. Mary folded the letter in half, then again, then once more, until it was nothing but a hard square she could shove into her coat pocket. She didn't answer, not then, but all day. Her silence was sharper than usual. She burned the beans. She snapped at Sarah for crying. And when Eli asked if she was all right, she lied. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat outside on the porch steps, wool shawl pulled tight. The stars above were endless, their cold light indifferent to her fear. Eli stepped out quietly, handed her a cup. He didn't ask what was wrong, just sat beside her, both of them watching the dark. After a long time, he said, "You don't tell anyone your life, not even the dead." She didn't look at him. "He wants to take them. Says I can't do it alone." Eli didn't answer. But, after a while, he stood and went inside. When he returned, he carried something bundled in an old cloth, 3 wooden carvings, small as apples. "I hawk a horse and a sleeping dog. My father carved those," he said, placing them gently in her hands. "Gave them to me when I thought I didn't have enough to offer anyone. Said sometimes a man don't have much, but he still gives what's his. That's the measure." She held them, thumb brushing the rough edges. Her throat was too tight to speak. In that moment, she didn't feel alone. By late November, the snow came thick, wet, and clinging, coating the fence lines, muting the hills, burying the last of the dry grass. The ranch settled into the sound of winter firewood cracking, boots stamping the cold from numb feet, and the long hush between chores. Mary rose before dawn each morning, lighting the stove with shaking fingers. Her breath fogged in front of her as she poured water into the tin basin and rinsed her face, forcing herself to keep moving. She could not afford to stop, not even for a moment. The children adjusted in the way children do, naturally and without ceremony. They learned how to trap heat in layered clothes and took to wearing mismatched wool socks, scavenged from the box of old garments Eli had kept tucked in the barn. James now worked beside Eli most days, proud of the way he could hold the reins without letting his wrists shake. The little ones had stopped asking if they'd ever go home. The letter from Owen remained folded in the drawer where Mary kept her sewing needles. She hadn't written back, but she knew she'd have to. And soon, one afternoon, she caught Eli watching her from the edge of the barn. She was hauling buckets of water, her shoulders hunched against the wind. He didn't say a word, just walked over, took one of the buckets, and carried it in without a sound. She didn't thank him, not aloud, but she let him walk beside her again the next day, and the next. It became a habit working in tandem, splitting wood or hauling feed, rarely speaking, but never quite apart. In the rhythm of shared labor, something old began to loosen. She found herself asking his opinion. He asked hers. They disagreed once over how to brace a storm door, and instead of falling silent, they argued calm, steady, no sharpness, just heat. It surprised her how natural it felt. That night, after the fire had burned low, Eli reached over and placed a folded scrap of paper near her sewing. "I wrote to Owen," he said quietly. "Told him they're safe here. Told him you've got help." Mary stared at the paper. "That was yours to do." "I know," he said. "Do it anyway." Her hands tightened in her lap, but she didn't push the paper away. The days shortened fast. Evening came like a lid slamming shut. One night, the storm they'd all been dreading arrived, driving snow, wind sharp as razors, a low, endless howl that rattled the windows. A beam cracked in the barn sometime after midnight. Eli was out the door before she could stop him. Mary followed without thinking, pulling on boots, wrapping a scarf around the baby, and sending the older children to watch the stove. Together they worked to brace the frame, yelling over the wind. His hand closed around hers once, steadying her as she slipped on ice. The cold was unbearable. Her fingers went numb, her cheeks stung raw, but still she stayed beside him, refusing to leave until the work was done. Back inside, she stripped off wet layers and held her hands to the fire. Eli stood nearby, steam rising from his shoulders. She turned to him, and in that warm, flickering light, he looked both familiar and utterly unknown. The silence held. Then she said, voice low, "Thank you." He looked at her a long time. "You don't have to say it. I know." But she said it again, anyway. By mid-December, they had carved out something that felt less like survival and more like life. There were still days she woke in dread, still nights when Nora cried from a dream in Mary's chest, clenched with the ache of every choice she had ever made. But there were other nights too. Nights when Eli read aloud from a warm book about horses, his voice slow and rough. The children gathered close. Nights when Mary baked cornbread with the last of the lard, and the scent filled the house like a blessing. And there was one afternoon, quiet, gray, snow still falling, when she looked across the yard and saw him leaning against the post, his face lifted slightly to the sky. She crossed the space between them slowly, coat buttoned high, breath visible between them. "You said once you didn't choose this land," she said. He nodded. "But you stayed." He looked down at her. "I stay where I'm needed." Mary took a slow breath. Her voice trembled when she said it, but she didn't look away. "I want to stay too, if it's mine to choose." His face didn't change at first. Then his eyes softened, not much, but enough. "It is." He reached for her hand, not to hold it, just to touch it, just to know it was there. The wind had stilled. Somewhere, the sun was setting behind clouds they could not see, but the light changed anyway. Christmas came with little ceremony, but the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need it. There was no tree, no wrapped parcels, but Mary baked a small cake from flour and dried apples, and Sarah sang while Nora clapped her little hands. Off Mina's beaten, delighted. Eli carved a whistle for one of the boys and a little wooden rabbit for the baby. He left both gifts near the stove without a word, but the children knew. And Mary knew. That morning, they all ate together, cramped around the table, steam rising from their cups. No one mentioned that there was no meat, or that the wind had howled through the cracks again that night. Instead, Mary looked at the small scene, the warmth, the flickering light, the children's laughter, and felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not safety, exactly, but belonging. After breakfast, Eli motioned her toward the barn. She followed, brushing snow from her shoulders. He led her inside and pointed to a corner where a new cot had been built, solid, while minus made, thick with blankets. "For the little ones," he said. "Too cold on that floor." Mary reached out and touched the edge of it, her hand running over the smooth grain. Her voice came quiet. "You didn't have to." He shrugged. "I know." They stood there a while, the silence filling the space between them like slow minus moving water. Then Eli spoke again, his voice lower this time. "I've been alone a long while. Got used to it. Didn't mean I liked it." Mary turned to face him. Her eyes were tired but steady. I've been surrounded for years, and still felt like no one saw me. Their eyes held. She saw it in his face, in the unspoken ache, the quiet hope, the way he stood like a man still learning how to ask for more. She stepped closer, not to kiss him, not to claim him, just close enough that their breath mingled visible in the cold air. Then maybe, she said, we'd try not to be alone anymore. The letter to Owen was sent a week later. Short, direct. She told him she was staying, told him the children were safe, fed, and working the land that fed them back. She did not ask for his blessing. She didn't need it. There was no reply. The thaw came slow but steady. By February, patches of dirt reappeared under the south-facing slope. Birds returned to the fence posts. Mary took to walking the edge of the property with Eli in the early evenings, just before the light died. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. One night, he reached into his coat and handed her a small tin. Inside was her wedding ring, the one she had taken off after John died, tucked into the pocket of her old dress, forgotten in the move. She stared at it, then at him. I found it, he said. Didn't know if I should give it back. She held it in her palm, heavy and warm from his hand. Then, slow and calm, she closed the tin and slipped it back into his. I don't want it back, she said. Eli nodded, then reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small band of plaited leather, bound with a copper clasp. This one's new, he said, holding it out. If you want it. She took it heartful and quiet. I do. Spring came not with a rush, but with the slow patience of something earned. The children grew loud again, chasing each other through mud and early bloom. Eli taught James to ride a stubborn old mare, and Mary planted seeds with the youngest beside her, little hands patting dirt with clumsy care. They built a fence together around a plot of land just north of the barn, and when they stood back to admire it, Eli said, might be enough space to build something permanent. Mary smiled. I think we already are. The house never got much bigger, but the table did. The land gave what it could, and they gave back in kind. The leather ring stayed on her fingers, softening with time, but never breaking. They did not speak often of the past, but sometimes, in the quiet before sleep, Eli would reach for her, and beneath the quilt, and Mary would let him. Not because she was still broken, but because she had chosen to heal here, in a hard place that had never promised kindness but offered it anyway. In a home built from survival, steadied by silence, and warmed by the steady beat of choosing each other again and again. If this tale rode with you, subscribe and continue.